Thank you very much. The last speaker was from a big European state and sharing the perspective of a big European state. I'm trying to share the perspective of a smaller European state. But first I must say I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very proud to be here at this Jabloko conference. I think Jabloko is a party that since the 90s has consequently, in an admirable way, had a line, fundamentally democratic liberal line that it has been following in Russian politics. And I think this is something that I think is very, it's not always easy, I think, and I think Jabloko has done really well. It's also great to be in Moscow from more personal perspective. My family from my grandmother's side actually came after the Russian Revolution to Finland from Russia. They used to be bankers in Moscow. So also from this point of view, it's great to be here for me. So I'm going to talk about what I see as a big problem in world politics now, and this problem is the fact that power politics and geopolitics has become an increasingly dominant part of the political agenda of world leader meetings at this moment. I think this not least because of the war in Ukraine. I think this is a problem because this geopoliticization of foreign politics and international politics is not desirable in any way. It's not needed, and it damages really those fundamental liberal and democratic values and the pursuing of these values in the world. And of course, I'm speaking from a Finnish perspective, and for me, I think Finland should take a stronger part in actually promoting human rights, promoting democracy, promoting rule of law, promoting responsible market economy in the world. And I don't think we are actually doing it as well as we should do in Finland. But to understand why we are not doing this well enough in Finland, I think we have to understand Finnish political history, and especially the Finnish relation to Russia. Because in my country, in Finland, we are now and we have always been following very closely what ideas are predominant in Russia. Whether this has been under the Tsars or after the revolution during the Soviet Union or after the fall of the Soviet Union, we have been very much interested in what is going on in Russia because we have been very much, of course, influenced by events in this country. It has influenced our internal politics, and it has also always influenced our foreign politics as well. And I still think that we today are affected by this. We are affected by this closeness to Russia in an unnecessarily strong way when it comes to our own foreign policy. Of course, the Finnish, it's in a way understandable, the line that Finland has had in foreign policy during a long period, because, I mean, if we look at our history, it's not strange that we as a small country want to be careful. We have ourselves in Finland seen this line as a pragmatic line. But in Germany it was dubbed Finlandization, this line, and I think that this shadow of this Finlandization is still falling a bit on our politics, unfortunately. But to understand still why we have this pragmatic, so-called pragmatic or Finlandized line, I think, okay, if we look at what happened, like I read the memoirs of a former Finnish president called Paasikivi, who gave the name, actually, the Paasikivi-Kekkonen line was the Finnish, as you probably know, was the line of Finnish foreign policy. And I read his memoirs a bit before coming here because I thought it was somehow interesting to give a bit of perspective. And he wrote in the year 1940, Paasikivi wrote in a memorandum to another Finnish politician his view on Finnish foreign policy. And he said, and this is a quote, "A small state is drawn into the big conflicts and the whirlpool of big international events that they cannot influence, and the small states should thus try to avoid being drawn into these events in every possible way. The small states are thrown into the counter-currents of big states, and the peril for the small states is to be destroyed, and this peril is always there. So this was the fundamental. This was something that inspired the whole foreign policy of Finland during decades. And of course, he had his reasons. He had a bitter experience. It was him who negotiated with Stalin, and we know that it was very difficult. But it's also, of course, and this somehow continued. But I think that this trauma from this time also continued, and it was also politically used and abused this also domestically in Finland for motivations of power. And of course, we should learn from history, but we should also we should be careful of not being prisoners of our history. And I think that in Finland sometimes we have unnecessarily been prisoners of our history as well. Of course, there is truth in the fact that foreign policy is not conducted in a vacuum, and of course real events and real geography always play a role. But I don't think we should put these things. I don't think we should put our what we call our national interests against the wish to promote human rights, democracy, rule of law, liberal values in the world. These two things are not against each other in any way. But I have recently heard senior politicians also in my country saying that what regards the sanctions, we have to be part of these sanctions because we have to answer our obligations coming from the EU. But in the same time, we need to have good bilateral relations with Russia. So then I ask myself, what are these obligations coming to us from the EU, for example? These obligations, because they are human rights, they are respect of international law, they are respect of the rule of law. I don't think that these are somehow obligations that we should think as some kind of burdens, but I think that these are kind of fundamental to us, and it's the best protection also for a small state against a big state, because if we don't see promoting these fundamental values as something essential for our foreign policy, then we are accepting a world where power politics and geopolitics becomes and disrespect of international law become the important things, and this indeed makes small states prey to big ones, this kind of world order, and this we want to avoid. That's why we have international law. That's why we should support human rights, democracy, rule of law. But what is the situation now? Well, in Finland, people are slightly concerned about developments in Russia. This must be said. And this is related to the war in Ukraine. And it's also related to the assertion of the Russian state to protect its interests outside of its borders. People are worried about this. I think they are unnecessarily. I must say, I don't think. But I think these kind of things become exaggerated also in the public mind. But still, I must say that people are a bit worried, and also the contempt for international law that has been shown in this Ukraine situation has been preoccupying Finnish people because of the things we saw before. But on this point, I also must say that if we want to that when we criticize Russia's actions in Ukraine, we also must remember that many of us did not criticize the United States actions in Iraq, for example. And this, I think we have to remember, because this is also used now in a propagandistic way against the West, I think. The fact to say, but also many of your countries were actually breaking international law when invading Iraq. And I think that we have to that international law, we cannot be selective with international law. That is my point. You cannot say that it's okay to breach international law when one state does it, and that it's not okay when another does it. So this, I think, is a good lesson to keep in mind. Another thing in Finland is that we can see that the developments in Russia have highlighted again this Finlandization problem, because we have had a recent debate because we have a debate about building more nuclear power in Finland, and the government has proposed a bill. There were diverging opinions in the government, but a slight majority in the government still put forward this bill to Parliament that we will allow a new nuclear power plant to be built in Finland. And this power plant is a Rosatom power plant. Okay, so this is a fact. There will be a big owner, and it's technology from Russia. Okay, so then the question of the foreign policy and the security policy dimension was also raised during this debate. One can make it. One can have his or her own opinions regarding if it's good or not that we build this power plant. But actually, I don't think you can dispute the fact that this kind of thing has an influence on the security and foreign policy as well. But these kind of voices were, by many, actually said that we should not raise these concerns. That it was seen as something that we should. That many senior politicians were also saying, no, you are not allowed to speak about these concerns. There is no foreign or security policy issue at all involved with building this nuclear power plant. But of course it is. And I think that this is the thing, that we can see that this kind of debate sometimes also becomes more difficult in Finland when developments go in a certain way in Russia, and this I don't like. We should be able to talk about questions. We should be able to lift the questions up for debate. Okay, so to conclude, I hope we will see a change of direction in the world in the sense that we will have more human rights, rule of law, everything on less focus on geopolitics, less focus on power politics on the agenda. Because the focal point of international politics should be to address the truly pressing questions like climate change, tackling climate change, for example, to reduce global poverty. Global poverty is at appalling levels at the moment. What are we going to do with the post-2015 agenda, for example? These are questions that should dominate the agendas of world leaders. And while the focus is on geopolitics and power politics, these issues are sliding away from these agendas. This we own. I think we all own this to the people on this planet, in our countries. I think all leaders own that these questions are put on the agenda. We need to build sustainable democracies. We need to support the development of the rule of law and human rights. And we have to do this together, I think, as liberals. Thank you.